Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest because everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on that show. Now, as you know, sometimes during this podcast, I get an opportunity to meet someone for the first time while we record. And that is the case with my guest today, Jeannie Diefenderfer. I really try to pronounce that correctly and definitely respect the names. Now, she owns or she operates a nonprofit called Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance, which is really meant to empower and motivate CEOs. And so I definitely want to learn her journey in business or her career and why she feels like it's a good idea to give back and support those that are on their journey in leadership and business as well. But before we get in this episode, Jeannie, can you give the listeners a little bit of background on who you are?
Sure. So I could make that really long or really short. So I'll give you the short version.
Okay.
So I am a business leader who worked for a company for a very long time, 28 years. And I retired 10 years ago. And since then, I do a variety of things, including serving on boards. I advise leaders on scaling their business. I participate as a nonprofit leader in organizations. And most recently, I became the CEO of this great organization called Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance last June. And on the personal side, I'm an immigrant from Korea. I came to the US when I was 13 years old. And I am married with two grown kids, 27-year-old Mia and 23-year-old Derek. And I live in New Jersey.
Oh, nice. Oh, you East Coast. All right. So one of the things I'm thinking about, and as I go into this, is tell us, as you came to the United States when you were 13, tell us a little bit about that experience, being a first-gen Korean immigrant, getting acclimated or, connecting with, being in America.
Yeah. Well, I look back and I realize it was not an easy time because at 13 years old, as you can imagine, landing in a completely foreign country, having graduated elementary school in Seoul, Korea, and not speaking a word of English when I landed in, of all places, New York City, when I first came. So it was hard. But I was actually part of a Catholic school in New York City called Sacred Heart. And they did an amazing job customizing my education. And I learned the language as quickly as I could and made it a point to make sure that language didn't become a barrier for my growth. And I went to, after Sacred Heart, I went to public junior high school in Queens, and then high school in Queens. And then I went to college in the New England, Boston area.
So being that you went to college and your first generation, tell me a little bit about that experience, obviously navigating higher ed and navigating college, being in the first year family, and who did you rely on? How did you get through college and kind of actually figure out what you wanted to study and the like?
Good question, Philip. So I would say partly having grown up in a culture and a household that values higher ed, right, or values education, I think I was conditioned to make sure I study very hard and that education was your ticket to whatever successful outcome you wanted, right? So in college, just like I was in high school, I focused on studying. I majored in chemical engineering. at the school I went to, and I studied hard. I also played hard, right? Because I mean, you want to make sure you don't miss out on the college experience. But I put in a lot of hours to make sure that I got good grades and I learned as much as I could. And it all served me well as I look back on my life.
So engineering. So obviously we're going to do a long fast forward, but engineering, why engineering, and what was your goals in that point for that major and that career?
Honestly, it was process of elimination for me. So I was really good in science and math, particularly because in Korea, that is highly sought after, I'll say. It's something that we're all focused on, studying hard and getting good grades in those subjects. And as an immigrant, Philip, when you come to the US, at least for my culture, it was always a vocation seeking kinds of education that'll give you a successful life, right? So either engineering or medical or law school or something like that, right? Nothing like liberal arts or English or psychology or, you know what I mean? Those things didn't even enter probably our orbit. So when I looked at engineering, because it was aligned with what I was already good at, it was probably a natural direction that way. I do have to say, as I look back, if I were to do it all over again, I probably wouldn't have studied engineering because I do love other things. Like I love art history, I love philosophy, I love English and literature and linguistics. So I will probably do something different.
Shout out to the liberal arts. I was a history major, and definitely,
I would
I
love to be a history
yeah,
major.
I had no ambitions. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just studied history because I was interested in the topic, and particularly just learning about stories. Storytelling was always important to me. So as you navigated it, you got this degree in STEM. What was your first job out of college? Kind of jump starting your career.
That's a funny story because the year I graduated from college was not a good year for chemical engineers. So I decided I needed to land a job first and then figure out navigating towards my field. So I interviewed for a management internship program at a company called New England Telephone in Boston, which is a utility, as you know, which eventually became Verizon Communications, right? So I went in there thinking I'll stay there for about a year and stay in Boston until my field improved. So I could jump over, be a chemical engineer, whatever that meant. But as life always goes this way, I stayed there for 28 years before retiring.
So now, okay, putting that together, that was the 28 years that we talked about before we got on this call. 28 years with New England Telephone, aka turned into Verizon. Tell us about that experience. I'm thinking in my mind, particularly in the business world, and correct me if I'm wrong, was a lot of males, maybe not many representation, particularly 28 years ago. So tell us a little bit about the early years in the business world. Were you one of the few? Was it navigating a new space? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Philip, I would say I was the only. And because I went into the field operations where I supervised technicians who were all white males, I was the first Asian American college hire into that department. So it was a shocker for both sides. But I learned a lot because I was super curious. I'm a curious being by nature. So I was super curious about the expertise these technicians had. And I wanted to learn as much as possible. But I also wanted to be a good boss and a good supervisor. But I did have my share of those unpleasant situations where I was called names. I was told to leave. People probably bet on my failure more than my success. And when I looked around, I didn't see anyone that looked like me, but I did see a few people who were African American and women who, when I reached out, meant a great deal to me in terms of mentoring me.
I definitely want to get back to that mentorship and that guidance and maybe strategy. So, while you were in that space, and obviously you worked there for 28 years, so obviously there was some resiliency there. What were some things that kept you driving and keep you going in that world? And when did it click to say, I'm not going back to the electrical, not the engineering world. I'm in this for a long haul. When did that click?
I'm not sure if there was a moment that I said to myself, this is a clicking moment. I would say that as I built my career over several years and I started to be recognized for my accomplishments, right? First as an individual contributor and then as a supervisor of people. It became more fun because I really learned to love getting things done through other people. And I decided to stay and continue to grow in that manner. What was fun was I got to increase the level of responsibility by getting promoted in organizations that aligned with my background, which was technology, operating, and it got more fun as my responsibilities increased. And then it kept on getting bigger and bigger, honestly.
So, I think representation matters, and obviously, connecting with those. So maybe as you're navigating, maybe twofold, when did you start seeing yourself as a leader to empower other leaders, maybe other females that came in after you? Or did you, also in these spaces, did you start seeking out mentors and people to guide you too? So kind of that middle ground, like who did you look up to, but then who did you also have opportunities to guide and lead?
I definitely learned to be a mentor by having great mentors myself. So I had the fortune of joining one of the employee resource groups in New England Telephone, even back then, called Minority Management Association, MMA, of New England. And the leadership of that organization were all African Americans. So I started to develop relationships with those folks and who were around long before I came into the company and have gone through thick and thin to get to where they are. And they served as great mentors for me. And I was not shy looking for advice and guidance from those folks. And because I learned from them, and they also taught me to pay forward, that when I got to position of influence, that it was my duty and obligation to also mentor others. And as you said about bosses, I've had my share of not best bosses, right? So I always say that because the experience is so much more memorable when you work for somebody that you know isn't the best boss, it always stays with you what not to do. So I learned over the years how to be a best boss by actually working for bosses who were not so great. So those lessons I kept. And I always remember to make sure that when I got to positions of greater responsibility, I would be a good boss and a better boss for others. And that I would always look out for people who look different than the norm to make sure that they also got the level playing field to show their potential and develop.
I think that's wonderful. And, obviously that's a testament to your long career and your thing. So I was just curious, what do you try to do as a leader? And then another fold of that, when you try to do it, what do you believe are the qualities of a good leader? Because you kind of told those mentors sharing everything, but now you have that example, you're a leader. So, what do you try to do? And then what qualities do you believe leaders have?
So I learned a lot in my long life Well, probably shorter than many, but longer than also many, including you, I suspect, is that I wasn't always intentional about answering the kind of questions you ask, right? So I didn't go off thinking intentionally about what are the kind of things that I want to do to be a good leader. I simply led. I simply did what came naturally and intuitively to me. But I think goes also to character, the kind of person you are, right? So I think I'm generally a caring person. So I care about other human beings. I think fundamentally, I believe in giving and receiving trust. And I know that one of my deepest values is treating everybody equally, right? And to me, that doesn't matter what position you hold or what title you hold or what organization you belong to. So those were, I would say, some fundamental things that guided me. And as a result, I developed a reputation where I was not afraid to push back on those who were bullies. But also, when I got to positions of power, I tended to protect people who were victims of bullies because I didn't believe in that. I believed in treating everybody with respect because we are all humans and we should be respected. And the words that we use today, right, are equity and inclusion and everybody showing up as who they are and being respectful, right, as humans. And because I fundamentally believe that, it's just the way I led.
That is really powerful. And that really makes me smile. You can see I'm smiling right now. But I also like to know, like, how you said I just simply led, and maybe some of that is intrinsic or family values. So maybe what do you believe were some family values that bled over into your leadership? Things that you attribute to your Korean heritage or the way your parents raised you that really informs how you lead.
Oh, it's a great question. I do think that I was raised with a set of values that said the higher you go up and the more position of influence you gain, leadership is not about point of arrival and then point of entitlement, but actually a place of responsibility and obligation. So the way I led was usually, I say often, I lead from the front. I'm not one of those leaders who sit back on the mountain and wave the flag and let people charge. I tend to be the first one out there. And because I believe in rolling up my sleeves with my people and getting my hands dirty, and that's why I loved the most when I had large organizations of operations people who actually were frontline employees who got the stuff done with customers. And because I like leading organizations that were action oriented and delivering the goods to customers, I tended to be out in the field with them all the time. And I think those are the values that I sort of brought with me. And I led in a way that people knew over time that I understood what they did. They could tell me the truth, that they didn't have to sugarcoat it. I often went out in the field to get the truth. So the information wasn't being filtered to me because I was a higher level. And I listened, and people knew they can be honest because they also knew that I'm honest. I don't believe in sugarcoating the truth, even when it's bad news. I felt that it was my obligation as a leader to tell people the news the way it is, the good, bad, and the ugly. And as adults, people who are informed will make the right decision for themselves all the time.
I love that. I'm gonna actually use that quote: point of arrival, point of or a place of responsibility. So it's almost like I didn't make it. Like you never just make it and you're done. The journeys continue. It's a continuous journey in leadership. You're not just once you get to a peak, it's not a plateau. You're always elevating, always learning, always growing, but also growing in responsibility. I like that. So obviously you had a wonderful career, 28 years, amazing. You know, after your end of your career, you know, I don't know the finances or anything like that. What made you say I got to, you know, continue to give back or do some more after 28 years with New England Telephone?
Well, I felt that 28 years was a long time. Again, I didn't wake up one morning and say, well, 28 years, gotta go, right? But I knew for me, I was self-reflective enough, I think, to know that at some point there were people underneath me with really high potential who needed to be promoted and grow in the business. And as long as people like me sit around after 28 years and continue to occupy those seats, the place doesn't get ventilated, right? And then I also honestly saw changes in the culture and the leadership in my business. And I've done most everything that I wanted to do, you know, in those 28 years. I was also active outside the business in other nonprofits. I sat on nonprofit organization boards. I love mentoring people inside and outside the business. And my kids were at that age where I could leave and actually do something else for the second chapter in my life and switch it up. And because I'm a curious person, there were so many other things I wanted to learn and experience. And I felt it was the right time. So that's when I decided it was time for me to depart. I hate the term retire because it sounds like you're going to wrap it up and, you know, I don't know, go sit at home and do nothing. But I was only 51 at the time, and I knew I had a lot of time and ramp room left for do other things. So timing was right.
So, you know, as the CEO of Higher Ambition Leadership, you get a chance to connect with so many CEOs in the community. So what are some of the things you've learned with working with those CEOs?
Well, what's so unique and special about the CEOs in our alliance is that it's almost a set of self-selecting people who specifically focus on practicing a way of leading that's very aligned with my values. So they're value-driven, purpose-driven, people-centered CEOs. So very much aligned with the way I am as a person. And having an organization and a community of those people who are very similar in the way they look at the world. They are deep listeners. They believe in action, not just words. And they believe in deep listening, not only to certain people in the organization, but to everybody in the organization. And making sure that whatever they do, they focus on purpose, performance, and people in the way they lead their organizations. And they believe and they are committed to delivering economic value for the business. After all, it's a for-profit entity they run, right? So they need to make money, they need to be profitable, but they truly believe that they get there by practicing human-centered leadership.
I love it. And I'm kind of remiss. I jumped right into what, you know, the things you've learned from working with them, but give us a little background. What is Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance? You know, just the blurb and for those to learn about it.
Sure. It's an alliance of CEOs and their senior leaders who are really, really committed to helping one another build organizations that deliver superior economic and social value. So they believe in the both and, right? They don't sacrifice profitability for the sake of social values, and they don't sacrifice social values because of profitability. They believe the one feed the other, and they're sort of symbiotic together, right? And they practice it every day. They come together to learn from one another. They are authentic and vulnerable people. And our organization is a glue that holds this alliance of CEOs and leaders together. We convene them, we provide programs for them, we provide leadership development training for their leaders. And we try to provide a platform where they get to also communicate with others who practice this way to increase the impact, not only for their individual companies, but on the larger world.
I love it. And so, maybe thinking about it, what are some key values in regards to human-centered leadership? I heard that word, and I'm thinking, what are some core values and core beliefs if someone was saying, hey, I want to be a human-centric leader or CEO?
Yeah.
What will be some things you would tell them they need to kind of focus on?
I think authenticity is big, right? So just being true to who you are and being authentic and vulnerable to show yourself as a human, that you are beyond the title, beyond the position, and being a human like everybody else. They're not different than everyone else as humans, right? And this, it's a forcing function during the COVID period because everybody went through the same experience. Everybody got locked up. Everybody was vulnerable to this disease and virus. We all had to work remotely. Didn't matter what position you held. And I think that became really clear in terms of showing up as a human being to the rest of the organization who are also suffering. And I think authentic leaders who showed up that way really inherently got the trust from their employees as showing up as one of them because they were not afraid to show their vulnerability, right? And to me, that's a big part of being human-centric. The other thing is everybody knows when the other party is not listening. And I think one of the big attributes of being a human-centric leader is practicing deep listening, no matter who you're listening to. Not just the top level people, not just the investors and the shareholders, but to all the stakeholders in your community, including your employees, your community partners, your suppliers, and others, right? So human-centric leaders inherently know how to do that.
I love it. There's a great value to active listening. There's a great value to all those things. So I think this is, great. I think this will be a part of the show. I think I'd like to do a quick pivot and we'll go into my next segment, which is called Shot for Shot. So you get to ask me any random question related to this or not, and I get to ask you a random question. Would you like to go first? I go first.
I'm going to go first.
All right.
So through your higher education experience, what about the roles you played in the variety of universities that you served gave you the experience to have the opportunity to serve others beyond the four walls of the role you played?
Well, that's great. I think as I said earlier before the call, I do know I have a 9-to-5 role on campus. I am working employer relations at a career center. But beyond that, which is very fortunate, is that I work in a university in a location that I grew up in. So I work at George Mason University, which is in Fairfax, Virginia. And so I get an opportunity quite often to see young people that look like me or grew up went to the same high schools or regional high schools as me. And so I get this mirrored feeling where I'm now on the other end. I'm like the uncle to young men. And as I said earlier, in between, my role, while my role is really employer facing, employer relations, I really particularly wanted to do something where I still had a touch point on students. So that's why I became an advisor to student organizations such as the NAACP and the Alphas and the National Society of Leadership and Success. And so I don't know, I think the mentorship aspect is something that I've done outside the four walls, really intentionally being a presence to guide people and really help that next generation. Because I definitely do feel a sense of helping, my little, nieces and nephews that they feel like, or my little brothers and sisters. I think I like to say little brothers and sisters. That makes me feel less old, but I know really they might be my nieces and nephews for real, for real. But I definitely get a chance to do that. And that's really motivational. I think building real authentic relationships with them, staying in touch with them. Sometimes these mentorship relationships last well beyond their Mason experience. They become fellow alum, and I joke with them like, you're a fellow alum like me, like, and I get, because I did go to Mason as well for my master's. So like, we get to build a relationship, and I'm looking forward to the day when they start inviting me. I know some of them out there, y'all listening, invite me to their weddings or their children's events or their kids' events, and I get to support them and see them, grow up into adults. And hopefully I left an impression that they want to give back and help, maybe become future educators themselves. Who knows? But that's really my opportunity to get outside these four walls and really do stuff outside my normal role that makes me very happy. That's a great question.
Wonderful, Philip, because I always say humans learn best by watching how others behave rather than being told how to behave. And I think through your behavior, you're teaching all these young people how they can pay forward, just like you are, which is fabulous.
So I love your mindset. I do love the idea that you say, when you were growing up, it was engineering, doctors, or bust. So I'm very curious to what your children studied. And were you, now that you said that as your answer, were you as strict about what they studied in college? Or you were like, now that they got their own opportunity, I'll let them explore. I'll be a little different. And I'm curious to that. That's my question for you.
Oh, thank you. So, contrary to popular belief about Asian mother being tiger moms, and I'm sure I was tiger mom from time to time, actually, I had zero say, nor did I want to have a say in what interests they pursued. But one thing I try to emphasize with both of my kids is whatever they choose, give it 150%. Give the kind of intensity and effort that is worthy of a person to focus and pursue. So my daughter she did look at James Madison, and by the way, and some of the others down there. She ended up going to Richmond, and she majored in healthcare policy and advocacy because that's what got her excited about working in. And my son, who is still in college at Seton Hall in New Jersey, is an economics major with a private wealth management minor. So clearly, neither of them went to engineering.
I love that. I love that. And shout out to, coming down to VA, the great state of VA. Was it University of Richmond or VCU?
University of Richmond.
Oh, that's a wonderful school. I used to work for VCU, so I know the Richmond area very well. And so, hey, you got them coming down to the best state and on the East Coast, Virginia. So that's great. Yeah. So this has been great. This has been a great episode. I really enjoyed learning about your journey, asking questions about leadership. And I definitely took some gems, took some notes. As you can see, I'm putting my head down and taking notes. So this is the part of the show where I'd love for you to share, called shout outs and plugs. Show love to anyone you want to show love to. Shout them out, give them their flowers, and then plugs. These are things that you're working on or things where the listeners can either follow up with you directly or also just the websites and all those things. I'll make sure to put those in the show notes.
Great. Shout outs. Oh my, there's so many. My family, I always say, speaking of children, Philip, the biggest and the best teachers of my life are my children. I learn from them every day, and it's a gift. So I shout out to my family and all the people who taught me, all the people who gave me constructive feedback, in addition to compliments, because I learned the most from those who invested in giving me constructive feedback. And people like you, Philip, who spend time outside of your day job to mentor and give service back to those who really could benefit from your guidance and mentorship. So that's my long shout out. And for plugs, of course, Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance is an organization that anyone who cares about authentic human-centric leadership should look up. Our website at higherambition.org. It has lots of great information and rich content around our members, our programs, our convenings, and all the people who are in our community, many academics who produce incredible research on leadership, as well as business leaders who have wonderful accomplishments in the area of high ambition leadership practice. And I can have many plugs because I'm involved in so many things. I do think that anyone who's interested in giving back to young people, particularly in higher ed, should actually look for ways to go back to their alma mater and pay forward with students who are there to help them out in any way they can, whether or not it's giving guidance or giving them advice on career choices and professional development. The other shout out I would give is any other organizations out there who are working on developing and giving platform to leaders who actually focus on human-centric leadership and purposeful leadership should look for ways to partner with the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance so that we can exponentially create greater impact on the world.
That's excellent. And I'm definitely going to look that up and resources. And these are one of those pleasurable things where I definitely, when I meet people for the first time via this podcast, I get to smile. I'm learning. This is part of the journey. This is also one of the best benefits of having a podcast is that the guests I have, they are just aligned with the values and positivity, and that energy, it just radiates through over the Zoom or whatever we're on. And so I'm very happy to meet you, Jeannie, and it's just been a pleasure. Obviously, we'll stay in touch. Now you're part of the Positive Philter Network, as one of my past guests. And so for Positive Philter listeners, please check out Jeannie and all her resources, Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance. I'll definitely put all that in the show notes. Please share this episode with your family members and friends. If you have a question for the podcast, call the hotline, which is 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Sometimes I share those voicemails on the podcast. And additionally, as I said earlier, every episode is dedicated to my father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund. It's something very dear to me, him and his guidance and mentorship. So every episode is dedicated to him, and I would definitely put his fund in the show notes because I definitely want to elevate something that celebrates a great man and an important person to me. Thank you so much for listening. Please give this episode a star, a like, a subscribe on Apple and Spotify. Please elevate this. Please share this and keep on sharing positivity and well-being. And we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.